While I picked up this game day one, it took me a while to bring myself to play it, and I don't really know why my hesitation came to be. Fortnite. I usually enjoy narrative-based games, however upon completion and for what the game offers, I wish I hadn't waited so long to play. Detroit Become Human is proof that single-player games have a place in today's gaming landscape, and that PlayStation's Quantic Dream still has its chops after the acclaimed Heavy Rain and underwhelming Beyond Two Souls. What's going on, guys? TKD123 here, and this is my review of Detroit Become Human. First, let's talk about the gameplay. It's surprisingly fun and intuitive to play for being a narrative-based Telltale or Don't Nod-esque game. I'm nitpicking here, admittedly, but the camera has something left to be desired at times, with certain scenes where the game is trying to show the setting or scope of a given situation. It zooms out awkwardly sometimes, throwing off your controls as a side effect. But a simple button press of L1 to do a 180 usually fixes the confusion, so it's a minor complaint if anything. But what isn't an issue is how the game utilizes motion, the touchpad, and thumbsticks to execute tasks within the game in a much better way than using the face buttons. While admittedly not a new groundbreaking feature, it's a nice touch and emphasizes the detail that went into this game. The game tries to match the movements you do on your controller to sync with what you're enabling to be done on the screen, and it's just as satisfying as ever. Quantic Dream could have done the simple button taps or button matching sections, which are in the game to be fair, but they are few and far between. Rather, controls that are just overall fun to execute, which is saying a lot based off of the fact that this game isn't about the gameplay per se. Now let's talk progression. The game is broken up into multiple chapters that tell the story of three different androids: a maid house helper named Kara, an advanced prototype android from Cyberlife named Conor, and a caretaker android named Markus, who is the core of the story. As you play and complete each chapter, you get an overview of a flowchart that shows all the different decisions you could have made or did make within the chapter. Chapters that are shorter have a pretty limited flowchart as opposed to other longer chapters that are more dense and dynamic, where you'll see a lot more different options. From doing optional things in the chapters, choosing different dialogue choices, or exploring different areas in the environment, the flowchart, like many other narrative games, shows what percentage of players picked which choices that can be filtered between friends and the world. While not a unique feature, it's always super interesting to be able to see what choices other people made, especially with chapters that have pivotal decisions with big consequences. For me, I found myself spending a lot of time looking at all the different paths I could have taken in the flowchart, and will surely make you want to go back and see how you could have had a different outcome than you got. While some chapters are great and escalate one of the three stories, some are admittedly slow paced and are just okay in comparison. However, they still serve a purpose to the overall plot and don't mess up the pace of the game too horribly. Overall, you'll likely end up yearning to play more and figure out what's next in store for Kara, Conor, or Markus. I found myself doing the cliche one more chapter many times. My first session was 3 hours long when I only intended to play for 2 hours. And part of that is due to the way the game is broken up into many chapters as opposed to the usual Telltale or Don't Nod large episodic way of dividing up the game. This game will surely put its hooks in you by its story and at how well the acting is done when looking at our three characters. And with the game also being divided up into small little bite-sized chunks, you can easily do a chapter here, a chapter there, and not have to feel dedicated to an entire hour-and-a-half long session like with other narrative games like Telltale or Don't Nods. Now on to our characters in the game. Like what I said before, the game follows three androids with three different stories and issues that all converge at the end of the game. The game does a great job at allowing the stories to also tell the story of the world through magazines in the year it's taking place in, 2038. From topics happening in the world such as World War III on the verge of coming to fruition in the Arctic, to over half of men in a survey saying they've tried having sex with an android, and a wild 68% of them preferring sex with an android over a human. The world almost becomes its own character, and it's a nice touch to have the magazines to see how the world has changed through the introduction of androids. However, to think all of this happens in 20 years is a bit outlandish, but to be fair, in 1998, I bet if we saw how technology would advance 20 years after to 2018, we wouldn't believe it either, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. First up, Kara is the maid house helper we talked about before, and we actually opened her story by seeing how androids are purchased at an Apple-esque type of store. She was intended to be a replacement android after her owner Todd destroyed the last one and lied about it, saying it was hit by a car. Kara returns to Todd's house where we learn he was laid off his job because androids replaced his position, and he copes with his sadness with red eyes, a drug we'll hear more about in the game. We rapidly see that Todd is regularly unstable due to his hatred for androids and abuses androids he owns along with his daughter Alice. With my playthrough, Kara and Alice escape the wrath of Todd and continue on in the game, but you may not have that same outcome during your playthrough. Kara acts like a mother to Alice throughout my playthrough, and it shows a lot of emotion and care towards her. I made choices that kept them together and kept Kara protecting Alice all the way until the end. While a detail gets revealed about Alice towards the end of the game that doesn't quite make sense in terms of Kara, it's probably worth exploring in a later video. Next up we have Conor. He's a prototype police investigative android from Cyberlife sent to investigate the growing number of deviants in Detroit and the world as a whole. Deviants being androids that have disobeyed commands by their owners and are making decisions that are beyond the bounds of their original function and code. And they are essentially androids that have begun to feel human emotions, ranging from empathy, love, and fear. They also worship and obsess over RA9, a phrase many deviants repeat, but as far as I'm aware, never explained at what it actually is. I'm assuming RA9 is a reflection of a spiritual being for deviants, their god, sent to free them from the hold of humanity. Sounds familiar, huh? He aids Lieutenant Hank Anderson, a member of Detroit City Police Department that uses drugs and alcohol to forget his dark past, and thus is on the downslope of his career when it was once something he was quite good at. All that aside, Hank is still one of my favorite characters in Detroit Become Human, acting as the comedic aspect of the game with his vulgar language and the avenues of the game him and Conor explore. In terms of Conor, you'll also get a first-hand account at how advanced he really is, from all the information you'll be able to scan and know in seconds, as opposed to Kara and Markus, who are far less advanced in that form. With my story, I tried to keep Hank a friend of mine, but I found it difficult, and I feel many did too, just based on how androids played a role in Hank's dark past, along with his general animosity and annoyance with them as well. Our android Conor also explores his own nature on if he himself could be a deviant, if he himself feels emotions too. At first I gave in and acknowledged that Conor could indeed be feeling emotions as well. However, in the end, I stood my ground as an android. However, in hindsight, I regret it, but we'll talk about that later. Lastly, we have Markus, first being the obedient caretaker to Carl Manfred during the final days of his life, to then being the leader of the movement to free the androids. Markus ended up being my favorite character, and the journey he goes through in the game hits on many tones similar to the injustices African Americans have faced in our real history. In my story, he realizes the mistreatment of androids as a whole after he is framed for the death of Carl and thrown into a terrifying android graveyard. Thereafter, he rebuilds himself literally and is given a variety of clues to a place called Jericho, where deviants can be free and live on their own terms as opposed to being under the order and control of humans. He aids Jericho and the other androids in the settlement and grows their numbers to eventually end up being the leader of Jericho. Upon leading Jericho, you are given the decision to lead the movement peacefully or violently, which in itself is one of the hardest decisions throughout the entire game. Humans usually have no problem killing androids. To them, they're just a piece of technology or a hunk of plastic, commonly said throughout Detroit. Why should androids give them mercy when they wouldn't do the same in return? I chose the opposite and decided to be peaceful and not lead violently and allow my words to reach and convey the freedoms Jericho wanted for themselves and all androids. Basic unalienable rights. Doesn't this all sound familiar? As a whole, Markus is the center of the entire game, with Conor and Kara's stories all converging to himself and Jericho, resulting in a very different ending depending on the choices you made, which at the game's core is its greatest asset. But then there's Chloe, another character worth mentioning that is the android in the main menu of Detroit Become Human. While unplayable, she breaks the fourth wall and talks to the player directly. Every time you load up the game, she'll give you a survey to complete that goes into your thoughts on androids if they were real, hypothetical scenarios, and comments on how your story is currently going. This offered some of the most memorable parts of the game due to the types of questions she asked, as well as how the world answered as well. One that sticks is how dependent we've become on technology as a whole, which is very dependent according to those that have played the game. There's also another element to Chloe in the fact that depending on how your story goes, you could be given the option to allow Chloe to leave and be free or keep her with you. It's great. Now, what are my final thoughts? While I predicted I would end up liking this game before launch, being a narrative-based game and taking place in a fleshed out future version of Detroit that's filled with androids and the complications they bring on the social standpoint, there are a few things I never thought would happen. Usually in a narrative game, I tend to not look back, make the decisions I would instinctively make, and have that be my only playthrough. However, with the sheer amount of different ways the story could go, it has made me want to go back and see how my flowchart could differ from my first playthrough, because admittedly, when I finished the game, I didn't quite like where I ended up. What if I made Kara less loving towards Alice, or decided to allow Conor to become a full deviant and feel his emotions, or took the violent approach many other members of Jericho wanted with Markus? There are so many different ways this story can be played out and told that allows the game to be replayable without going stale. If we're being honest, as much as I enjoyed the game, it is a narrative-based game in the end of the day. So with that being said, I don't know if I can fully justify the $60 price tag for the game, very well knowing that this is a game that will likely be heavily discounted in the coming months. However, if you want a game that truly makes you think about a future of androids and have nothing to play at the moment, Detroit Become Human gets my stamp of approval. But what did you guys think about the game? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, hit it with a like, and make sure to also check out our description where you can find our Instagram and Twitter to follow us on those platforms. And make sure to also stay subscribed to PlayStation Source to keep up with the latest and greatest in PlayStation. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.